that's better. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Showdown. Today we are watching Liquid Zulu and Pogan. Let's put me in the center there again. And we'll put Liquid Zulu over there, so match the thumbnail. Debate whether or not capitalism is coercive. So format, again, as always, will be 5-minute opening statements, followed by 45 minutes of open discussion, and then followed by 25 minutes plus, whatever that ends up being, of audience questions. If you want to ask a question to either of the participants, put an asterisk at the beginning and the end so that I can pick it out in the chat easily. Super chats, of course, jump the queue. So, gentlemen, if you want to introduce yourselves very quickly before we begin, Pogan, please.
Can't figure out how microphones work, apparently, so I concede the debate. I'm just kidding.
You're What's in the right place.
It's Pogan here, back again. I'm over on youtube.com/PoganVids. If you search Pogan, you'll find me. Twitter.com/PoganVids. Patreon.com/Pogan, whatever, who cares. I identify as a socialist. I make a variety of content, both attacking the right and left-wing movements that I think are bad for a variety of reasons. You can find me using the links that I just stated. Go ahead.
Just a heads up, Pogan, before we continue, your gain seems to be going back and forth a little bit. Like sometimes it'll be very loud, sometimes it'll be very quiet. So just
better.
It seems better now. Yeah, it's inconsistency. It's fine either. Just we don't know which one it is. Liquid, please introduce yourself.
First of all, I'd just like to say I'm very excited about the present Sunday ceiling reveal we had at the start there.
Oh my god.
But yeah, I'm Liquid Zulu. I do anarcho-capitalist videos on YouTube. I do a lot of debates. You can find me at youtube.com/Liquid Zulu. That's about it.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll start on a coin toss. Whoever wants to go first.
I don't mind. Pogan can go first.
You want to? Okay, Pogan. 5 minutes. Go.
Yep. Mic sounding okay? Can you hear me?
It sounds fine. It just seems to get quieter and louder. Maybe try to keep like a consistent distance. That might.
All right. No
problem.
Yeah. So I'm not going to take the whole 5 minutes. It's going to be a pretty simple summary. The proposition is capitalism coercive? Obviously, I'm of the opinion that it is, but I don't think that in and of itself is a very useful discussion to stop at, only because pretty much any society or economy that utilized a state, for instance, or some sort of apparatus like that, would it require some sort of coercion. More compelling is the idea that capitalism has this unique feature where basic needs and necessities, the ability for workers to even ensure their own survival and capacity for continued labor in the system, is gate kept essentially behind the sort of coercive forces that are perpetuated upon them by property owners, by the bourgeois class, to use a Marxian term. So the onus that I think is on myself is to just show that this sort of coercion is uniquely detrimental, even relative to other systems. And of course, once that requires establishing the system is coercive. And then the onus, I think, on Zulu when presented with that will be to show myself and the audience either A, that capitalism is not coercive, which is a difficult thing to do, or B, to show that while it is coercive, this coercion is not distinct from other systems. So I think it'll be a really interesting debate, and I look forward to it.
Thank you very much. And Liquid Zulu, 5 minutes.
Sure. This is basically, it comes down to the Marxist theory of exploitation. Now, Marx, in his, he makes some various different theses, 5 I'll go over here, where they're basically, on the face of them, they are correct, i.e. they can have correct explanations for them, but the explanation he gives for them, i.e. the justification he gives for the correctness of this thesis, is where he slips up. So, first he has the history of mankind is the history of class struggles. I completely agree with that. It is the history of a relatively small exploitative class exploiting a relatively large exploited class. And, the ruling class is unified in its common interest by upholding its exploitative position and maximizing its exploitatively appropriated surplus profit. I completely agree. The exploitative class is indeed trying to maximize its amount of exploitation. And the class rule manifests itself in specific arrangements regarding the assignment of property rights, or in Marxist terminology, in specific relations of production. In order to protect these arrangements of production, the ruling class engages in coercion, i.e., enforces these property rights assignments, as the Austrians would say. And internally, the process of competition within the ruling class generates a tendency towards increasing concentration and centralization. So you have this tendency towards a sort of oligarchy, right, or a monopoly of the ruling class, right? You can't have competition within the ruling class because then there's going to be all sorts of problems there. And you have the centralization and expansion of this exploitative rule. And furthermore, you have this, well, I'll try and find it here. Right, you have the idea of class consciousness. So basically, the ability to resist the ruling class, it can only come about through class struggles, as the Marxists say, or which is the success of these class struggles will be based entirely upon the class consciousness of the exploited, i.e., how much they are aware of their situation. Now, all of these theses are, on the face of them, correct, i.e., they have these correct justifications. But the true determinant here is, what does it mean to exploit? And the anarcho-capitalists say, well, exploitation is done by the anti-productive sector, i.e., the state, towards the productive sector, i.e., homesteaders, producers, traders. This is the dichotomy here. So a homesteader is somebody who appropriates something from nature. The producer is somebody who takes these produced things, takes these homesteaded things and produces something new out of them. And the trader is somebody who obviously trades. Now, the exploitative class, i.e. the anti-productive sector, they are taking from this productive class, and they are, in effect, reducing the ability to produce. That's why they are anti-productive. And this is the true exploitation theory, i.e. the exploitation theory, which is not riddled with falsehood.
Thank you very much. All right, so 20 minutes open discussion. Take it away.
First of all, can you hear me? Is this better? More consistent?
It was inconsistent in the last 2 seconds. I think you may have 2 devices going on.
Okay.
And it's oscillating between them. So maybe just make sure that you don't have, if you're on Discord or something, make sure that both your devices are, only one of your devices.
It's automatically, this should be more consistent. It's trying to automatically adjust mic volume. Hopefully you can hear me. Stop me if you can't. There was something said in his opening statement regarding the Marxian concept of exploitation and how it basically challenging the notion of exploitation to begin with and contrasting it with, I guess, a more colloquial or an understanding of exploitation as it would exist in like a subjective theory of value as opposed to Marxian economics. Just to clarify, because while this doesn't necessarily deal with the proposition of the debate, it's important to cover. So the point here is the Marxian sense of exploitation is a technical term used within the context of his seminal work, Das Kapital. It's often just called Capital because that's the translation. And what he means by exploitation in that context is not a normative thing. It's not this colloquial usage. It's specifically the removal of surplus labor value from workers in a capitalist mode of production. So it's not exploitation in the sense that I'm emotionally exploiting somebody. It's not that kind of usage of the term. He literally means workers generate a set amount of labor when they produce commodities. A portion of that is necessarily taken by the capitalist as profit. So just to clarify that term real quick, that's what he specifically means. But as to the proposition of the debate, capitalism consists of 2 economic classes, right? The bourgeois, or the capitalists, and the proletariat, or the workers. And the point is, that sort of exploitation is a prerequisite for the functionality of the system, right? Capitalists are not able to profit, at least under Marx's view, unless they use that surplus labor value extracted from workers. And because the bourgeois or the capitalists are the ones who own private property, right? They own the means of production, because they're very often the people who, in virtue of their capital, are disproportionately influential on politics and social forces. there's obviously very patently going to be coercion on the part of the bourgeois targeting the proletariat, right? It's just an irreducible fact of the system's functionality. Now, to reiterate, because I'm trying to stick with the proposition here, the question is just, is that a uniquely coercive system relative to other systems? And I think all that would need to be established is capitalism in the Marxian view, in that model, going to be more coercive than a system like, hypothetically socialism, some sort of communal system like that? And all that needs to be established there is the reality that faces most capitalist societies, which is the reason wage laborers are in the position that they are, the reason wage laborers are so compelled to engage in labor for exploitative wages in the Marxian sense, is because their basic needs are protected, safeguarded by the capitalists behind labor. Marx talks about this as necessary labor value. The capitalists have to give workers their necessary labor value so they can survive for additional days of work, but what they are implicitly threatening is a deprivation of those basic needs if the workers refuse to engage in labor. So think about it this way, right? You hear a common canard among critics of socialism, Marxism, and that canard is, well, you can walk away from capitalism at any time. You can just leave your job at any time. You can get another job. You can, start your own business. And this is, of course, just completely divorced from reality. Most workers do not have the capital to start their own business because that capital is disproportionately held by the bourgeois. Most workers are in a position where if they leave their job, they either have to immediately gain replacement employment, which is a challenge in and of itself, or they have to rely on savings that they may or may not have. Of course, most Americans, something like 70%, don't even have $1,000 as an emergency fund, so on and so forth. The system is very much structured in such a way that you are compelled to engage in wage labor lest you face consequences like starvation, homelessness, eviction, lack of basic needs. And there are some capitalist societies that provide social welfare to cover these things, but even then, the system is still coercive because part of buying into that system, part of qualifying for those basic needs, is often participation in whatever tax system happens to be in place, which itself requires income. So as for the proposition, is capitalism coercive? I don't really see how Liquid Zulu can even make a case that it's not at baseline coercive on some level. The only question is, to what degree is it coercive?
So you said there will always be coercion from capitalists towards workers. Is that simply because the workers otherwise, they wouldn't have all these glorious wages and whatnot, so they couldn't have their basic needs met, as you were saying?
Right.
Why exactly does this constitute coercion? Could you define coercion for me?
I just mean that there is some extenuating circumstance such that an otherwise free choice is not truly a free choice, or the free choice is made, essentially the workers being compelled to make a choice in one direction or the other because of that force. So in the case of wage labor, right, it is theoretic. People often say you can choose where you work. Laborers in capitalism can make free choices as far as employment is concerned, but you don't really have the choice as a laborer to not work, period. You don't have the choice to cease participation in the system completely, because if you do, you are now deprived of basic needs because you don't have the income to purchase them. And welfare, as good as it is, as much as it should be expanded, is an increasingly unreliable, poorly managed, overly bureaucratic system that doesn't really save the majority of workers from that sort of Hobson's choice, that false dilemma.
What does it mean for a circumstance to be extenuating? Like, I might want a hot dog. Would my want of a hot dog be an extenuating circumstance such that I'd be exploited if somebody wanted to sell me a hot dog?
I don't understand the question.
I'm just trying to get down what exactly an extenuating circumstance, as opposed to just a circumstance, would be. Right? I might want a hot dog, but is my want for a hot dog, would that make it exploitation if somebody wanted to sell me a hot dog?
Presumably, if you're making a free choice to purchase the hot dog absent any other forces, I don't see why it would be coercive. But I also don't see the relevance, because that would be
a circumstance.
Just let me finish real quick, right? I don't think you're going to say that hot dog example in any way is analogous to how wage labor functions in a capitalist system, right? You don't think those two things are perfectly analogous.
Well, I'm trying to get down whether or not they are analogous, because I think they are analogous, so I want to see what the disanalogy is. So what is different from my circumstance of wanting a hot dog and the wage labor circumstance of wanting the wage?
The disanalogy is that your refusal to participate in the hot dog business by buying the hot dog does not carry with it being saved from the potential loss of basic needs. That's the disanalogy. In a capitalist system with wage labor, right? Technically, you can say, well, you either work for me or you don't, right? But that choice, that dilemma carries with it a myriad of number of other factors. Among them, your refusal to work carrying with it likely eviction, a lack of food, a lack of water, all things that are basic needs, yet nonetheless must be purchased with capital that you have to earn through labor.
So, I mean, I want to, get down what exactly a basic need would be. Is it just stuff that if you didn't have it, you would die without that thing?
Yeah, they're either things that you need to live, or they're things that, generally speaking, are required for basic functionality on the part of an individual in a society. So,
I mean, then this is just kicking the can down to what basic functionality means, right?
I can give you some examples.
Well, I don't want the examples. I want, the criteria set, which would define for me whether a need is a basic need. Because I might have a need to satisfy, my want of a hot dog, right? What exactly makes it a basic need, right?
With respect, this is a red herring. You and I are not going to legitimately disagree that things like food, water, shelter are not basic needs. If you're going to sit here and tell me
I need a good definition of what a basic need is.
Just let me finish speaking. If you're going to tell me that it's not a basic need for somebody to, consume enough calories to make sure their body continues functioning, consume enough water to avert dehydration, stay inside some sort of shelter so they're not exposed to the elements which themselves might cause either disease, injury, or death, right? Respectfully, I don't see the utility of bickering over the semantics of what a basic need is or isn't, because I know that you understand that the things I've rattled off, at least the three core things, are going to be basic needs for any member of a society. If you don't agree with that, if you don't think they're basic needs, then the entire debate is just predicated on you thinking that, well, capitalism can't possibly be coercive because you don't actually need food or water. You don't actually need a house, which is just a waste of our time.
Well, no, it's important to get down what exactly these basic needs are, because they are key to what constitutes coercion under your model. So I want to, if I know what basic needs are, then I can construct a reductio ad absurdum based on your definition of basic needs.
When you directly asked me the question, what is a basic need, I answered it. The answer was, a basic need is something that prevents death, right, food or water, or protects you from circumstances that are very likely to entail death or injury or sickness, right? The category of these things is generally thought to be things like food, because you need calories to continue functioning as an organism, water, because dehydration leads to death eventually, shelter, because exposure to the elements is very likely to cause disease, injury, or death over time, right? Which is why homeless people tend to be in very poor health, tend to be at the highest probability of contracting illnesses, right? Partially because of their exposure to the elements. You understand that these things are basic needs, and you understand what is meant when your average person says to you, X is a basic need. This seems like a red herring to avoid the topic that is actually at hand, which is,
would it be fine if we just...
I'm almost done, just real quick. Are these basic needs held gate-kept, for instance, by the people who have a disproportionate control of power and capital in order to influence people to engage in labor at their beck and call, right? That's the real question.
Right, so would it be fine if we just went ahead with food, water, and shelter as the basic needs? If something isn't food, water, or shelter, then it's not a basic need.
If those are the three you want to talk about, then sure.
Right, okay, so let's say I marry a woman, and I like this woman, right? And she's providing me food and water and shelter. And then she says, look, she has all these things, and she says, look, I'm gonna divorce you if you don't start doing the dishes. This is crazy. You're not doing any of the dishes any of the time, so I'm not gonna be with you anymore if you don't want to do the dishes. Would I be allowed to, then force her to stay married to me? if she didn't give me food, water, and shelter anymore.
What is even the relevance of the question?
Well, it's relevant because, you know, it's engaging in this voluntary exchange is what I'm getting at, is you're getting these things by the products of others. They are willingly giving them up to you. So could I force them?
Wait.
Could I force anybody to give them up to me?
Hang on, Pogan. Let him finish.
Like, would the woman in this marriage be coercing me in this marriage? Would it be a coercive marriage? Because if I don't agree to do the dishes, then she's going to divorce me, and I won't have access to her food, water, or shelter anymore.
First of all, there are plenty of circumstances you can describe as coercive in the way that you're talking about, but they're going to be disanalogous from the type of coercion that's being referred to with systemic wage labor in capitalism. Second, again, this is a red herring. We're not talking about individual instances of coercion. The topic of the debate is capitalism as an economic system coercive, right? Now, if you're trying to analogize a voluntary institution like marriage, because at least at the beginning of the marriage, the idea is that it's a voluntary agreement, with the sort of agreements and exchanges that occur under wage labor in capitalism, that's just straightforwardly going to be disanalogous, because there are extenuating forces in the case of wage labor that do not exist in the marriage example.
But those extenuating circumstances are the ability to get food, water, and shelter from the relationship, right?
Are you saying the guy married the woman solely in order to get those things?
Maybe he did. Maybe he also liked being married to the woman. Maybe he also liked the job.
Right, so if it's a voluntary agreement, then obviously it's not going to be one-to-one analogous
right,
with wage
but what
labor
makes
and
the marriage voluntary and the wage labor not voluntary then?
Because the hypothetical you've presented in the case of the marriage is at least partially free of the circumstances present in the capitalist wage labor example. That's why they're disanalogous.
How so? How is it partially free, though? Because it still has the food, water, and shelter criteria met.
In order for the hypotheticals to be one-to-one analogous, all the variables would have to be constant. The same considerations would have to be made. But you're not making the same considerations because in the case of wage labor, right, the basic needs that we're referring to are gate-kept by the capitalists. In the case of the marriage, right, you've already conceded that at least part of the reason for the marriage is this voluntary desire, this idea that he was marrying the woman because he...
It might not be.
Well, I don't know what might means there. It's the hypothetical that you're presenting me with.
You know, a person might marry another person because they like them, or they might marry them because they want all the stuff that they can provide, right? And you're saying there that the same considerations need to be made, but the same considerations are being made in the case of this marriage and in the case of wage labor, i.e. the same considerations are food, water, and shelter. The same relevant considerations, at least.
If the question is, can something truly be consensual with the coercive forces that we're talking about, you're actually begging the question against me in the case of the marriage. The reason you're begging the question is because you established in the hypothetical that the initial agreement, right, the initial marriage itself, is voluntary. So to then argue with me about whether or not it's truly voluntary is just begging the question against me, which is why when we're talking about systemic wage labor under capitalism, right, and somebody says, well, wage labor under capitalism is coercive, they don't mean that the initial exchange was truly voluntary, right? Because people don't really go to work, generally speaking, outside of, like, psychopaths. People don't generally engage in wage labor under capitalism out of the kindness of their heart. They engage in wage labor under capitalism because they need to generate an income in order to purchase the basic needs without which they fucking die, right? It's not one-to-one analogous with your hypothetical in the slightest.
Right, so would this marriage then be coercive?
I feel like I've answered this question at least 2 times. To be honest with
I mean,
you.
yes or no
this,
then?
This hypothetical in itself is a red herring, right?
I mean, you can say as many words as you want, but actually, answer the question, please, at some point. Would this be a coercive marriage?
You mean, you're asking me if the hypothetical you presented me that presupposes it's voluntary is coercive?
No, it doesn't presuppose it's voluntary. In the Marxian sense, it doesn't necessarily. I'm asking whether this be a coercive marriage.
Hold on. I'll finish answering your question. You presupposed in the hypothetical that it was a voluntary exchange. I take voluntary to mean the coercive forces, if present at all, are not sufficient to significantly sway the decision.
I don't think I did presuppose that.
Yes, you did. You said it was a voluntary agreement.
I said I marry this woman. I didn't say
because you like her, right? Part of what you established was that you're marrying her because you like her.
Let's say I don't like her. Let's say I'm just marrying her because I want her stuff. I'm
Okay.
adjusting the hypothetical to suit your needs here, right?
So the question.
So let's say I marry her because I want her food, her water, and her shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And then she says, "Look, I'm going to divorce you, dude, if you don't start doing the dishes." Would this be coercive?
Are you asking if she's coercing you into doing the dishes under
Yeah.
threat of losing access to those basic needs?
Yeah. Is she coercing me?
In some sense of the word, sure. You're being coerced. You're being threatened with something under pain of not doing a task right. What does that get you? Do you think that's one-to-one analogous with wage labor under capitalism? Because I certainly don't.
I mean, it sounds kind of analogous if you're saying that it's also coercion, right?
I don't think it's analogous in the slightest, right? I think it's disanalogous because in your hypothetical, even if you remove the liking the wife part, the initial reason for the marriage has to do with attempting to obtain some resources that she has that she's willing to provide to you, right? And when you agree to something like that, you are agreeing with it under pain of knowing that you have to at least maintain some sort of some disposition or some sort of agreement in order to continue receiving those resources. But under capitalism, with respect to wage labor, right, the problem is you don't have a choice otherwise. This person, instead of marrying the woman, could just go work. He could try to do a number of other things in order to obtain the resources. But in wage labor, barring rare exceptions like having the capital to start a business or getting really lucky through like an inheritance, barring those fringe cases which are not applicable to the majority of workers, you engage in wage labor, right? Or you do not generate an income necessary to obtain basic needs. That, as I'm sure you'll agree, right, based on what we've talked about, is a fundamentally coercive relationship between business owners and employees. Do you agree or not agree with that?
I don't agree, no, because, I go on to... It's all to do with... I'm not owed what those capitalists have built. Like, this capital didn't just come out of nowhere, right? How does one become a capitalist? Well, they have to first forego present consumption in order to get that capital, right? They have to invest.
Using the capital that was generated through people creating commodities that they then sold for profit.
I mean, how did the first
labor, right?
bit of capital, how did the first capital good come into being? Did they exploit somebody for it? No. They forewent present consumption. Let's go for Robinson Crusoe on an island. He's picking berries off a bush. Then he notices there's a whole bunch of coconuts up high, but he can't reach these coconuts.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Hang on, Zulu, let him, or Pogan, let him finish his point.
So yeah, let's say Robinson Crusoe picking berries off a bush. This is very inefficient production of berries. He wants these berries because they would satisfy his end of, satiating his hunger. But he notices there's all these coconuts up high on trees, but she can't quite reach. But he knows that if he gets a sufficiently large and girthy stick, he might be able to poke these coconuts off the trees. This is a technology that he now has in his brain. He has this recipe to create this stick to, poke these coconuts out of the tree. But he knows that he would have to take out some time, which he could be spending picking berries, to find such a stick, or to fashion it somehow, right? So he has to forego the present consumption of berries, so he'd have to save up some berries from his picking sessions, such that he could feed himself whilst he's looking for this stick. And then he finds this stick, and then he can up his production of food. He can now get a whole bunch of coconuts, and he can have way more food than he had before. He had to forego present consumption in order to create this capital good.
Is that it?
Yeah, so I'm asking you, do you agree that that is how initial capital goods come into being?
It doesn't matter. The question isn't how did initial capital goods come into being. The question is capitalist wage labor coercive?
Right.
And you're trying to say, please don't interrupt me, I let you finish. You're trying to say something to the effect of, well, the laborer is not owed anything by the capitalist because the capitalist generated capital, quote unquote, on his own. Why would I be owed anything? To which the answer is really simple, right? There are maybe a couple fringe examples where a capitalist was able to generate an immense amount of capital without the use of wage labor. Those are going to be exceptions to the rule. The rule is the majority of businesses expand and develop further capital through the use of wage laborers, right? And those wage laborers, because they are engaging in labor in order to produce commodities which are then sold for profit on a market, are at least entitled to some level of compensation because of the exchange that's occurring there. Now the question is in a system where your choices are essentially engage in that exchange, right? Work for an employer to produce commodities which are sold for profit, or lack the income necessary to purchase basic needs which you've agreed are basic needs like food and water, minimum, right? Is that a coercive system? Is somebody being coerced under pain of lacking those basic needs? The answer straightforwardly is yes, and you seem very disinterested in agreeing that the answer is yes for some reason.
So let's say we're back on the island, right? And, Crusoe has this cool stick. And then Friday sees that he has this cool stick. But Friday, he doesn't understand how to make a stick somehow, right? He doesn't understand this. And then Crusoe's like, hey, I'll let you use my stick if you give me some of the coconuts you get, right? Let's say 1 out of every 10 coconuts Friday gets, then Crusoe will have it instead, right? Would that be coercive?
I'm just going to repeat the question that I asked you. Do you think wage labor in a capitalist system under pain of lacking income for basic needs is coercive? Yes or no?
No, I don't. And I'm going over why.
So you don't think that somebody being essentially told that unless they engage in wage labor, they will lack what they need in order to provide food and water for themselves and their family, you don't believe that is a coercive system?
No, because it isn't the capitalist who is forestalling these goods from them. The capitalist has got them on his own.
Whoa, hey, I didn't say it was the capitalist individually. I said it was a systemic coerce. No, I didn't say that.
Nature made it that we have entropy and we need to eat.
Hold on.
Right?
I said it was a systemic coercive force because one of the core properties of capitalism as a system is wage labor, right? It is a systemic force in place. Now, do you think, based on what I've... Well, look, you already answered no, so let's just go into it like this. Why is it the case that under a system that uses wage labor, where you either engage in wage labor or you lack the means to acquire basic needs, why would anyone accept that that's not coercion, at least at the base level?
Because you have these means. They aren't your means, inherently. They are other people's means. You have to agree to use them.
What do you mean by means? Means of production?
Means are things that you implement to attain ends. So
what does that matter?
What
does that matter?
You asked what means meant.
Pogan, let him finish his sentence.
You asked what means, I could say. Right? That's what means.
Okay, but why does it matter? The whole point is coercion is... No, that's not what I mean. Coercion is just you are being presented a choice, but one choice is being influenced by some extenuating circumstance, right? For instance, if I go into an ice cream shop, right, and I have all these potential flavors that I could purchase, but somebody comes in and says, I'm going to defame you and slander you on Twitter unless you purchase pistachio, right? Clearly that's an instance of coercion. Now, I wouldn't say this is one-to-one. You don't think that's coercive?
No, it's absolutely not. You're allowed to lie.
You don't think you're being coerced to buy pistachio under threat of being slandered?
But you're allowed to slander people. You're allowed to slander people.
What do you think coercion is, then?
Right now, I'm allowed to say Pogan does baths with a little rubber ducky. I'd be allowed to say that.
Why are we talking about what you're allowed to say?
Because if I'm allowed to say it, then I'm allowed to threaten to say it, right? I'm allowed to threaten things that I'm allowed to do.
I didn't say anything about... Listen,
like, I would be allowed to right now...
This is a red herring. This is ridiculous.
I would allowed to right now threaten that I will not... I'm allowed to right now threaten that I am not going to be your friend unless you agree with me. I'm allowed to do that because I am allowed to not be your friend.
I didn't ask you if it was allowed or disallowed. I asked you if that was an instance of coercion.
Coercion is disallowed.
What?
Coercion is disallowed. It's illegal. Not allowed. No bueno.
What are you talking about?
We're having a legal discussion here. Whether,
we're not having a legal discussion at all. I've already said that there's no, listen to me. I've already said there's a systemically coercive force called wage labor. The reasons wage labor is systemically coercive is because in a capitalist system, if a laborer refuses to engage in wage labor, they are deprived of the income they utilize to purchase basic needs, which you've agreed are basic needs. I then presented you with a hypothetical where you walk into a Baskin-Robbins, right? You're looking at all these flavors behind the glass case or whatever. Another person walks into the Baskin-Robbins and says, Liquid Zulu, if you do not purchase pistachio ice cream, 1 scoop, I am going to get on Twitter and call you a piece of shit bastard and slander you, right? Potentially, not necessarily, but potentially hurting your streaming career, your income, etc., right? And you're going to look me in the face right now and say that that person, right, is not coercing you in that instance under threat of something, under pain of something, should you fail to comply?
I mean, I just want to know what the actual thrust of your argument is here. If, you know,
Can you answer the question?
I'm just wanting to know what the thrust of your argument here. If not that coercion, that capitalism is coercion, and that this should be prohibited, right? Should capitalism not be prohibited? Should we just go along, and you know?
Why don't you answer the question that I've asked you?
And is it just a semantic debate then over whether it falls under the definition of coercion, or are you actually looking to prohibit capitalism? Do you think we should do something to have this class struggle and stop capitalism from this coercion?
None of that has anything to do with the question that I'm waiting for an answer to.
It has to do with the debate at hand, though, doesn't it?
In a Baskin-Robbins, if somebody comes in and says, Liquid Zulu, buy pistachio or I will defame
coercion.
you on Twitter. Just let me finish the question because you don't seem to get it. If somebody walks in and says, I will defame you if you don't purchase pistachio ice cream, you don't believe that's coercion.
I don't.
You don't believe that's...
It's not
Why?
coercion. It's not coercion because you aren't actually aggressing upon them. Coercion is an aggression.
What? How? I think that's
You're essentially...
that absolutely is an aggression.
It's
You're
not an
making a threat.
aggression. You're not initiating conflict.
What do you? But when you say conflict, do you mean a purely physical conflict?
Conflict is when two men try to implement the same scarce means towards contradictory ends. I.e., you know, Crusoe and Friday, they have this stick. Crusoe wants to use it for getting his coconuts, but then Friday wants to use it instead to stoke his fire. And they both try and do this at the same time. Oops, they can't both do the same thing at the same time, right? So they have a conflict here.
So you don't think threats are coercive?
They can be.
When can they be? Because I'm being threatened, listen, if I'm like trying to have a viable streaming career and somebody threatens to take an action that I at least on some level think could negatively impact my streaming career, even if I refuse to oblige the threat, the point is it's still coercive. The reason it's coercive is because given a dichotomy, given two choices, I'm being influenced to make one choice over the other in virtue of an extenuating circumstance, in this case a threat. Which, that core idea, that core foundational concept there, is directly analogous to the system of wage labor under capitalism. Yet, for some reason, I can't even get you to agree that the hypothetical I'm describing is coercive.
But it's not coercive because you aren't threatening something that you're not allowed to do. Like, I couldn't threaten that I will shoot you if you don't agree with me here, right? But I can threaten that I won't be your friend if I don't agree with you here. Coercion is the former type. Right? But the latter type of threat where, you know, I won't be your friend, I'm allowed to not be your friend if you don't agree with me. I'm allowed to do that, so I'm allowed to threaten that.
Look, I'm allowed to do all sorts of things that can still be used in a threat. I'm allowed to say something like...
Right, so threats are not coercion, inherently. They can be coercion.
You're conflating coercion in a purely strictly legal sense with coercion in a conceptual sense. There are plenty of instances that coercion...
It's a legal debate.
Listen to me. There are instances of coercion that occur on a day-to-day basis that are not in conflict with the law. When you go to a school, even a university, right, and you're disincentivized to, say, cheat on a test, there's nothing illegal about cheating on a test in a university. It violates school policy, and there are consequences associated with the violation of school policy, right? So that's an instance of coercion because I'm definitely being influenced not to cheat. I would argue it's a good instance of coercion. It's justified because cheating is generally something seen as socially bad, but you're nonetheless being coerced. Let's return to the proposition of the debate. You have an economic system. You have two classes, people who own property and people who do not and instead work on that property to create commodities sold for profit. If they refuse to work on that property, right, they are deprived of an income. If they are deprived of an income, they cannot purchase basic needs. Now, yes or no, is that an instance of a systemic level coercive force perpetuated against laborers?
It is not.
Why?
Because coercion is the threat of something that you're not allowed to do, right? And
no,
it doesn't
have anything to do with allowed or disallowed.
This is at its root a legal debate. I'll be clear here. By law, I don't mean positive law, i.e., what the state says is the law. I mean what our ideal law system is, i.e., what our ethic prescribes upon how these disputes should be solved. So, back to my question then, is what is the thrust of your argument if it's not that coercion should be prohibited? Do you think coercion should be prohibited? Do you think we should do something about this capitalist coercion?
There are plenty of instances of coercion that I think are acceptable, which is why a question like
right,
that
okay,
is a
but
red
do you think we
herring.
should do something about this capitalist coercion
Please
then?
let me finish speaking. Please let me finish speaking. The topic of the debate is whether or not capitalism is coercive, right? I don't accept that coercion is a purely strictly legal conception. I don't accept that something is coercive only in the case that it's illegal. There are plenty of instances of coercion, several examples of which have been provided to you already, which are perfectly in line with United States law, and yet nonetheless we would construe them to be coercive. And yet nonetheless we would construe them to be coercive.
Our ideal law. I don't, though, because we're talking about our ideal law system, right? And again,
no, we're not.
Do you think?
No, we're not.
Do you think that
we're not talking about that at all?
Do you think that this capitalist coercion should be prohibited?
That's divorced from the proposition.
Do you
of course
think?
I do. I'm answering
okay, you do.
question.
So then it's a legal question. Then it's a legal concern here because you think it should be prohibited.
That's ridiculous. The mechanism by which you would eliminate capitalist coercion doesn't involve using capitalist law or democratic
not capitalist law. That not the class law as the Marxists put it, but your ideal law system. You're saying it should be prohibited, which is a legal claim. You're claiming that it should be prohibition is a legal statement.
There is no reason to accept that discussing coercion necessarily invokes a legal conception of it.
Your formula, at least as it pertains to the point of contention.
Hang on.
It is legal.
Hang on, Liquid, one moment. Pogan, keep it within like 20 seconds, then Liquid, so you can reply.
You keep harping on this idea that coercion has to be a purely legal thing, and I don't accept that. It seems like what you're doing is trying to smuggle in a definition of coercion that does not comport with coercion as used in a philosophical or ethical or moral sense. So I'll reiterate my position. I think coercion is any instance where, given a set of two or more choices, one choice is heavily weighted in virtue of extenuating circumstances. There are justified instances of this, like a school, a teacher, anti-cheating rules in a school, and there are unjustified circumstances of this, such as wage labor in capitalism, at least under my view. But the justification doesn't actually matter. The point is merely establishing, per the proposition of the debate, that the dynamic between property owners and wage laborers in capitalism is coercive, the reason being your refusal to participate in wage labor carries with it consequences that would heavily weigh your decision there.
Okay, Liquid, you can reply.
Well, even talking about this unjustified versus justified coercion, then if we just talk about coercion in general, that's just going, if you have these different types of coercion, that's just going to be a semantic dispute. I don't think we want to have a semantic dispute. We want to have a dispute over the actual thrust of what we're talking about, which is whether or not capitalism is unjustified coercion, right? So unjust versus just is a legal claim.
You don't
so
even
it's
think
really
capitalism
legal.
Is coercive in the first place, though.
It's because we have a different definition of coercion. I think coercion is an entirely illegal thing.
Why do I care about what you think coercion is?
Because that's what the debate is over. We don't care about the semantics. I might think coercion refers to a yellow curved fruit, and you might think banana refers to that fruit, right? That is just entirely irrelevant. We want to actually go into what we actually have a disagreement over, not what we think coercion is defined as. That's boring.
You've been on a string of red herrings, so let's focus in on that, right? That difference in definition. The only reason
let's not focus on the difference in definition.
Excuse me.
Definitions don't matter.
Excuse me. The only reason you would be able to persuade me or anyone else, the audience, for instance, that we ought accept your definition of coercion, which necessarily invokes the law, over the more mainstream understanding of coercion as it exists in philosophy and ethics, is if you can provide some sort of argument for that definition having more utility over the other. But you haven't done that. Every time you've been pushed on coercion or asked if XYZ is coercive, you don't actually establish that your definition has more utility. You just invoke it again in this question-begging fashion. So I'll ask you directly, point blank, what utility does your definition of coercion, the one that necessarily invokes the law, have over the definition of coercion that virtually any other person would utilize in a debate of this nature?
I mean, you said earlier that you didn't want to go into a whole semantic dispute, right?
Just
so I don't. How exactly are we supposed to determine the utility?
Just answer the question.
How are we? How are we to determine the utility of different definitions of coercion? I mean, I would say legal coercion is just motivation. You're just trying to motivate somebody to do something. It's not coercion for me, right? So how do we determine the competing utilities here?
Legal coercion is a useless thing for you to say because you think coercion is
Exactly, it's just motivation.
Excuse me.
It's just motivation.
Excuse me. You think coercion is a necessarily legal thing already. I'm not asking you to.
I think it's a necessarily illegal
thing.
thing.
I'm not asking you to resupply your definition. I'm asking.
I mean, you got it wrong, so I gave it.
I'm asking you to give an argument that establishes that coercion can only be discussed within the context of the law, which is your claim at this point.
Right, I want to actually get into the actual dispute here, not just this little semantic disagreement.
We lost him. What happened?
I guess he's conceding.
My bad. I accidentally refreshed. Please start over.
Right, so I want to get into the actual dispute we have at hand, i.e. whether this capitalist mode of production ought to be prohibited in some way, not over what we're defining coercion as. That's a boring debate. I don't think anybody. I don't think anybody. Exactly right.
Right.
So let's not tussle.
Hang on. Liquid finish in 20 seconds. Pogan.
There's going to be no way for either of us to prove which definition is better, because a definition is just obviously a linguistic convention, right? It's what we want to get into is what actually our dispute is over, which is legal at its core.
No, sir, you're wrong. There are plenty of instances where a definition of a given term or an understanding of a concept can have more or less utility. For instance, if a term is diluted to the point that it becomes vacuous, which means it applies to every case within a given set of considerations, then it has less utility than a more narrow and pointed definition. You're not being asked to restate your definition of coercion because both myself and the audience already understand that you think coercion is an exclusively legal concept. What you're being asked to do is establish that coercion as an exclusively legal concept has more utility in a debate of this nature in philosophy and the philosophy of ethics, right? The philosophy of society, for instance, over the concept of coercion being just a set of choices in which one choice is weighed more heavily than the other because of extenuating cases. You haven't provided such an argument. Every time I press you, every time I ask you, okay, so is X coercion? Is Y coercion? Is Z coercion? Your only response to me is to say no because it's a legal thing. I'm not interested in you restating that. I'm interested in you telling me why anybody would accept that coercion is an exclusively legal thing in the first place.
I mean, I would be interested in you giving me some sort of way to...
So you're going to dodge again? You're going to dodge again?
I'm going to answer you. Jesus Christ,
Sure.
Man. Give me time. I'd be interested in...
Let him reply.
I would be interested in you giving me some sort of a way to weight the utility of different definitions of things, because utility is an entirely subjective thing. We have the subjective theory of value and whatnot, you know, and you know this debate. It's not over what the best definition of coercion is. We actually want to get down to the actual dispute we have here, whether or not it should be prohibited. That is the true crux of this dispute.
No,
it's just
no,
what is the point of debating over what the best?
coercive.
What is the point of debating over what the best definition of something is? What is the point of that? You're just trying to dodge this. Yeah, you're just trying to dodge this point.
No, I'm not trying to dodge. I've been very pointed. The reason we keep harping on the definitions is because I can't get you to agree that almost anything...
Give me your utility model of definitions,
Please
then.
do not interrupt me in the middle of speaking.
Give me it.
I've been as polite as possible to
You have not.
I can't even get you to agree that common instances and thought experiments that would be construed as coercive are coercive. The reason I can't get you to agree is because for some bizarre nebulous reason, you think coercion necessarily invokes legal conceptions. You think it's necessarily a legal term. I don't agree with that. Most people who use coercion in common parlance wouldn't agree with that. So given that that's the problem we have here, and the topic of the debate is establishing capitalism as a system is coercive, you have to explain to me why I or anyone else would accept that coercion necessarily invokes the law. And if you can't do that, just concede the debate, because it's been established per the usage of the term anyone else would use, myself included, that wage labor under capitalism is indeed coercive.
So imagine you came into the debate and said coercion is defined as when it is capitalism. And then, it's like, well, I mean, concede or show that your definition is superior. Well, then we have to get down to what is actually determining which definition is superior. Give me your utility model for how to determine what definition is superior as opposed to other definitions. Give me that, please.
I'm just still waiting for an argument that would establish...
Give me your utility model of definitions!
We need to use a purely legal understanding.
Fucking Christ, give me your utility model of definitions! Because you're asking me to show why my definition of coercion is better than yours. So give me how to determine it.
Okay, Zulu, let him...
I'll repeat the example I provided you. If somebody is standing in a Baskin-Robbins...
This is not going to help.
Trust me, it will. If somebody is standing in a Baskin-Robbins and another person comes in and says, either you purchase pistachio ice cream, or say, I'm going to slander you to your boss. I'm going to talk about you in a way that makes
it's not going to be coercion.
Negative in public, right? Your definition, because you are talking about it in a purely legal sense, requires you to say that that's not an instance of coercion. The problem, of course, is that almost any other conception of coercion, including the one typically used in the purview of like philosophy and ethics, would consider that coercion. The reason being, you are given a set of two or more choices, except one choice is so heavily weighted, right, based on extenuating factors, that it is strongly compelling the person in question to make that choice. Why is this relevant? Because it's directly analogous to the sort of weighted choice workers face in capitalism. They are heavily disincentivized to continue working for capitalists, for the bourgeois, because they're under pain of lacking the income they need to purchase basic needs, among other considerations, right? We can get into whether or not you think that's good or bad coercion once we can even establish that that's coercion to begin with, which you can't seem to agree with for some reason.
Can you or can you not give me your utility model for coercion?
You are completely dodging the question that I'm asking you.
Fucking hell, I asked you to give me your utility model for coercion, and then you went back into your Baskin-Robbins model again. Right? It's just going to go down the same road. I'll say it's not coercion, and then we'll get back down to you giving me your utility model for coercion. Can you give it to me?
Yeah, it's just a red herring. I gave you an example.
Fucking hell! Can you give me... You are asking me to show you why my definition is better than yours, i.e. why it has better utility than yours, but you're not telling me how exactly to determine this. Can you determine it for me? Can you determine that your definition has better utility than mine? Can you do that for me?
The topic of the debate is if capitalism is
fucking hell,
and we have a difference of definitions.
Right, so show me that your definition is better. Show me it.
Do you mind not interrupting?
You're not actually addressing it. You like to say about red herrings all day, but you're not showing me this.
Zulu, give him a few seconds to reply, and then you can go, Pogan.
I've given you the reason to think that the thought experiments we've gone through, in common parlance as well as philosophical parlance, would be construed as coercion. I'll restate the reason. Coercion, generally, is just an instance where somebody is presented with a set of choices, and there are extenuating factors that heavily weigh their probability of selecting one choice or the other, when it would otherwise be a free choice, right? Now, your definition of coercion is a purely legalistic one. It requires some sort of violation under the law. Now, you keep trying to ask me, what utility model would you have for preferring your definition over mine? But I've given that to you. The utility is that not only is it going to be more useful in describing a greater number of dilemmas that we've been talking about here, it also directly ties into the proposition of the debate, something you seem very keenly interested in dodging. Now, I need you to establish for me one of two things. You can either establish that capitalism is indeed coercive, but you think it's a form of justified coercion for whatever set of reasons you want to provide me, or you can just say it isn't coercive, fall back on this definition that nobody would accept because you haven't presented a case for it, and we'll just continue wasting our time going into these red herrings where you ask me meaningless questions about utility models. But I need you to make a choice one way or the other, because frankly, this back and forth where we try to explain to you that this purely legalistic definition in no way comports with what most people would be talking about and is entirely proprietary it's just not useful.
So you have it that it'll be your definition why your definition is better than mine is because it'll be more useful and it actually ties into the proposition. But both definitions trivially tie into the proposition because the proposition has the word coercion in there, so they both tie into that. So it'll be
So your
more.
argument is
So
that
right.
capitalism is
Right.
coercive because
Pogan,
it's
hang on,
because
Pogan.
it's legal.
Pogan, hang on. Liquid
So,
reply.
what does it mean that it'll be more useful, if not that it has more utility? You just kick the can down the road. Why will your definition be more useful to describe these scenarios that we've gone over? Why is it more useful?
We've already been over this. You're just trying to
haven't.
engage in red herrings again.
We have not been over this.
I've said several times why it would be more useful to talk about coercion within the purview of what I've discussed. What I'm trying to get you to understand is the proposition is capitalism coercive? Clearly, I think it is. The reason being, laborers are put in a situation where the decision to work or not work is heavily weighed in one direction.
So can you not tell me why it'd be more useful?
You can't even agree that that would be an instance of coercion, justified or not. You think your argument would essentially entail that capitalism isn't coercive because it's legal, which is an absolutely ridiculous stance to take.
Can you not give me why it'd be more useful?
Because then you've opened yourself up to all sorts of different instances of things people would commonly
Who are you
describe
selling
as
this
coercion, yet you would commonly describe as coercion, yet your
Then why do you refuse to show me why your definition is more useful?
Stop interrupting me.
Why do you refuse that?
You stop interrupting me. Your proprietary definition, right? Your reliance on it, your refusal to engage with the debate in a meaningful way and actually entertain
My refusal?
Yes, your refusal. What your refusal?
I've asked you many times to engage with the actual dispute at hand.
Your refusal to engage with what coercion is almost universally understood to mean does not mean that you have established capitalism is not coercive merely because, well, it's legal. Capitalism.
So why would it be more useful?
Mr. Pogan, let Liquid reply.
Why is your definition going to be more useful than my definition?
This has already been established.
It's not been established, though.
This has already been established multiple times.
Gentlemen, we're at time, so I'm going to give you both 3 minutes to make a closing statement. Pogan, you went first, so Liquid, would you like to make your closing statement first or last?
Sure, I'll go first. So Pogan has completely ignored the actual dispute at hand, i.e. whether or not this should be prohibited, and instead gone into semantic battlegrounds which he is not prepared for, and he has refused to give an actual proper definition of what it means for one definition to be better than the other. We have gotten down to the point of it, well, my definition is more useful than yours, and it ties into the proposition. Both definitions tie into the proposition, trivially. He has not shown why his definition is more useful with the situations we've got at hand. Either could say, well, this situation in the Baskin-Robbins, it's not coercion, it is coercion. Both are able to analyze individual situations. Furthermore, his labor theory of value, which is the root of all this, is completely flawed. You have marginal utility, i.e. I would value a second coat I could get less than the first coat I would get, by definition, because even though it costs the same amount of labor to make that coat, you have it. This is the law of diminishing marginal utility. You also have an oak tree of 100 years age obviously possesses a higher value to most people than would correspond to the 3 minutes it would take to plant the seeds for that oak tree, right? Pogan cannot respond to any of these points on labor theory of value or the actual debate at hand, which is over whether any of this should be prohibited.
Thank you very much. Pogan, you have 3 minutes.
I think this debate is an instance of significant intellectual dishonesty on the part of my opponent. I'll explain why. The debate is on whether or not capitalism is coercive. I established at the very beginning a clear definition of coercion, a definition that comports with how it's used basically everywhere in the purview of philosophy and ethics, right? My opponent, rather than actually entertaining whether or not the system is coercive per what almost anyone else would mean in a discussion of this nature, instead focused on purely semantic questions and a series of red herrings and questions designed to get as far away from the proposition as possible, which was basically just an effort on his part to run out the clock. It's basically just an effort on his part to avoid the actual proposition and just run out time by pretending like he has some proprietary definition that he doesn't want to get off of, which nobody else would entertain in a discussion of this nature. So I'll restate what I said and make it clear. Coercion is a situation in which two or more choices right, are presented to an individual, yet one or multiple choices are heavily weighed by extenuating circumstances, meaning there's some force in play that causes them to be compelled to make one choice or the other when it would otherwise be a free choice. This is how coercion is used in almost every instance of philosophical or ethical debate, right? Capitalism is a system where wage laborers are compelled to engage in labor under pain of lacking income that they need for basic needs, things like food, water, and shelter, right? Now, whether you want to construe this as justified or not is an interesting debate, and frankly, it's what I was hoping to discuss in this debate, but instead, it could not even be established that the system was coercive in the first place. Rather, Liquid Zulu, realizing that he would not win such a discussion, instead made the choice to focus on semantics and red herrings and thought experiments with no actual import on the proposition. So, I think it's clear to most people that it has been established, at least baseline, that capitalism is a coercive system. The more interesting discussion that could have been had about justified versus unjustified coercion has been burned away by the dishonesty of my opponent.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move into audience questions.
It's very funny that you thought you were hoping to discuss the actual question at hand there, when you clearly evaded it.
All right. Okay, we're going into audience questions now. So this is from Grammar Commie for Liquid Zulu. And how this will work is the addressee of the question will be able to answer first, and then if you want, you can reply to what's said in response to the question. So for Liquid Zulu from Grammar Commie, do you distinguish between capitalism in your understanding and a state of nature?
So capitalism, as it pertains to anarcho-capitalism, is simply Austrian economics, i.e., the hyphen capitalism, as I say it. I don't have a particular opinion on necessarily homesteading the turf of capitalism as such. So capitalism for me is simply to do with Austrian economics, which is entirely value-free. So, that would apply to, the state of nature or any other system that you might want to analyze. You can analyze it through an Austrian lens. So anarcho-capitalism is really my system at hand, which is really just anarchism, and the only difference there is how exactly you expect that this would play out. Whereas capitalism in the Marxist mode of production, which is really Marxist definition system, I'll say, is really a system wherein you have these capitalists and you have these wage laborers. And the wage laborers are receiving present goods from the capitalist, who will then sell them in the future. And the wage laborer prefers, he values higher the present goods over the future product of his production. I should go in the other direction, so it's more left to right, right? So, that's why the wage laborer would accept the present goods, because he values them higher than the future goods which he's producing, because he has a higher time preference. And similarly, the capitalist has a reverse time preference. He values the future goods more highly than the present goods, which are being created by which he's giving to the laborer. He values these goods which are being produced more highly than the goods that he's giving over here.
And Pogan, if you'd like to reply to that, you're welcome.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. This is a question for Pogan. Thank you very much, the Optimist Pessimist, for the $5. I disagree with your definition of the universal definition of coercion, and so do many others. It is far from universal. So I guess this is an invitation to address that challenge.
What is there to address? You need only look at philosophical and ethical discourse to understand that baseline, a set of a dilemma, a set of choices where one choice is weighed versus the other because of an extenuating pressure or force, right? Some force that's acting upon the actor, is what is meant by coercion, at least at the base level, in nearly every discussion on the topic. It's not even a question. You can disagree with it. Liquid Zulu certainly did. But the best thing you're going to do if you don't provide an explanation as to why that definition has more utility is just going to be something like, well, it's a proprietary definition, in which case, why entertain proprietary definitions when the goal is to establish the system is coercive or not?
Liquid, you're welcome to comment if you like.
Well, my comment would be, this is something that has been brought up in my chat before during this debate, that and I agree with the optimistic pessimist here that, my definition is not so proprietary as Pogan would like to make it out to be. It's very widely spread across philosophy, on the SEP page even, that my definition is the one which is preferred. So I would really like to see some sort of rundown from Pogan on where exactly he is getting his wide view of philosophy from. Because I watched his anarcho-capitalism video and it wasn't very in-depth there. He basically went over the David Friedman understanding of anarcho-capitalism and then one quote from Murray Rothbard. So not a very in-depth view of that particular area of philosophy.
Since you're interested in being dishonest, why don't I read the standard Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on coercion? We can see if it invokes your definition, which is a purely legal one, right? So the concept of coercion has two different faces corresponding to the two parties involved in its most ordinary cases. It picks out a technique agents can use to get other agents to do or not do something. It picks out a kind of reason for why agents sometimes do or refrain from doing something. Coercion is typically thought to carry with it several important implications, including that it diminishes the targeted agent's freedom and responsibility, and that it is a pro tanto wrong and or violation of right. Few believe that it is always unjustified, since it seems that no society could function with some authorized uses of coercion. Would you like to explain to me how that necessarily invokes the law?
Right, so, a violation of freedom, that has to do with natural law, i.e. you are reducing somebody else's freedom, i.e. their liberty, and, that is a necessarily illegal thing.
So
the author there...
Hang on. Let Liquid reply.
The author there isn't familiar with natural law, I'd imagine.
Yeah, again, your definition was a legalistic one. In fact, I asked you several times, are you talking about this in the sense of, like, social law? Are you talking about this in the sense of, well, there are plenty of instances where things happen that are coercive yet don't violate the law of whatever society. Would you call them coercive? You said no.
Again, I don't care about the law of whatever society.
Hey, easy, cowboy.
Pogan, 20 seconds, and that's my line. You can't steal that, and then Zulu.
I made it quite clear that what I'm talking about comports with the SEP's understanding, which is merely that an agent is being compelled to act one way or the other because of a force acting upon them. You have now changed your definition to something new when you were talking about an exclusively legalistic understanding through the course of this debate. So which is it? Do you want to say it comports with the SEP definition and is just force acting upon you to make a choice? Is it a legal definition in the sense of social law? Or is it now this concept of inalienable rights being violated, natural law?
No.
I'm going to allow Liquid to reply to that, and then we're going to move on to the next question, all right?
My concept of law is that of natural law, because natural law is undeniable. It's, this violation of freedom, that is necessarily illegal. I don't care about these violations of state laws, because I don't think the state is right about what the law is.
So you agree capitalism is coercive?
It's a violation of rights. Taking away somebody's freedom is a violation of rights. That is what the law is dealing with.
Yeah, okay, so can I respond to that? Because that's a fatal mistake.
There will be an open panel after the discussion. I am coercing you to then partake in that to continue this particular argument.
Wait, but it's legal, so it's not coercion. So
there is no law here. I am a totalitarian tyrant. Okay, so this is again.
But you are the law then.
No, there is no law. I just have raw force. This is a comment by Sexual Gangster, which I will allow. I guess I'll allow Liquid Zulu to reply first because I allowed Pogan to the first one. From the Sexual Gangster for $5. Is flawed. We couldn't concede to one definition without losing the debate. I don't know who this is referring to. It prevented us from discussing the actual issues behind the words. Liquid Zulu, would you like to comment on this? And if not, then Pogan can, and otherwise as it was.
Sure. So I would have loved to comment on the actual issues behind the words, and I tried to do that multiple times, but Pogan kept saying, no, let's go on to semantics here. Let's go on to which definition is superior here. I wanted to go into the actual issues behind this, the actual dispute here, rather than just the words we ascribed to this dispute. I wanted to do that very, very much.
Yeah, I mean, the problem isn't that, like, we couldn't concede to one definition. The problem is, again, Zulu is very interested in red herrings and avoiding the actual topic by hiding behind proprietary definitions, which, by the way, in his attempt to appeal to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, just only proved to further show that the definition was in fact proprietary and constantly shifting like a blob of jello on a plate. So as frustrated as I am, Sexual Gangster, fantastic name by the way, that we couldn't discuss concepts like justified as opposed to unjustified coercion, or whether or not there are reasons to maintain the coercion that exists under capitalism, that presupposes that the person I'm talking about is being intellectually honest and can actually entertain the proposition.
Liquid, do you want to reply?
I was too busy typing my chat talking about Go, so I didn't hear much of it. So I guess
we'll move on.
Yeah.
All right. So this is from Brooks Brown, and this is a long question. Let me make sure I know who this is addressing. Okay, I'm assuming this is addressed to Liquid Zulu, so bear with me if this ends up not being. So Brooks asks, capital today exists due to capital yesterday, and the largest landowners and businesses in America gained their power and capital outlay directly from chattel slavery. How is it moral to allow their capital to continue to circulate and be privately owned? And he gives examples. So of the Lemon Brothers, their entire empire began with the actual slave trade itself and the investment and loaning of cash for slaves. Aetna, AETNA, began as a company by insuring slaves for their owners like we insure cars or trucks. JP Morgan Chase began by outlaying capital accepted humans as collateral for loans, 13,000 of them, under their names Citizen and Canal Bank. All of the above are examples of massive amounts of capital and profit generation that were kept by the corporation and now rule much of the world from this. How is this moral? So I'm assuming this is addressed to Zulu. So just to recapitulate the original question, capital today exists due to capital yesterday, and the largest landowners and businesses in America gained their power and capital outlaid directly from chattel slavery. How is it moral to allow their capital to continue to circulate and be privately owned?
So yeah, this is basically, Marx goes over this, and this is basically Marx trying to sneak by what his actual argument is. Indeed, this form of capitalism, if we could call it that, is indeed coercive. That would be a coercive form of capitalism, if we want to use that term. But, Marx's true premise is that so-called clean capitalism is also exploitative, i.e. capitalism where this capital isn't accumulated exploitatively. It isn't accumulated via the state. That is also exploitative because you have this surplus value effect going on. That is what I'm really getting at, because I agree completely. All this statist shit going on, all this statist capital accumulation was indeed coercively accumulated. I agree on that.
Pogan, would you like to comment?
No, there's nothing to really comment on. It's just more of the same.
We'll move on. To Pogan, is all coercion bad? If not, is coercion a meaningful term? This is from Sith U, sorry.
No, not all coercion is bad. Yes, it's a meaningful term. There are plenty of instances where coercion can be justified. If you tell your kid not to do something because it's dangerous or because it puts them in a risky situation under pain of, you lose your Xbox, that's an instance of coercion. Yet we would often say it's justified in virtue of the fact that that sort of coercion prevents a negative outcome for both the child and obviously the parents. Another example that I gave during the debate is like a teacher-student dynamic, right? You're coerced not to cheat under pain of, for instance, expulsion from the school, but most people would agree that's a justified form of coercion because obviously we want to maintain the sanctity of educational institutions. We're supposed to be measuring the students' actual abilities as opposed to what they want to masquerade their abilities as, so on and so forth, right? So, no, not all instances of coercion are going to be unjustified in an ethical sense, but yes, the term still has philosophical and ethical utility.
Zulu, would you like to comment?
I suppose I'll just, say that, we've kind of gone over the whole issue of, this is just going to be into the same semantics of what coercion is, and, we've already gone over all that. So I suppose not.
Okay, thank you very much. This is from Fenton. Thank you for the £5. to Zulu. Do you know what a no true Scotsman, I'm assuming it means no true Scotsman fallacy is?
Yes, I do. I don't think it's really a proper fallacy. It's it's saying that, if I were to say no true Christian would not believe that Christ is our savior, well, that would be an entirely valid statement because it's involved in the definition of a Christian that you'd have to believe that Christ is your savior, right? I don't think no true Scotsman is generally not implemented properly. I think for the most part, you should entirely, when you're trying to show something to be a fallacy, and Pogan is quite guilty of this, just quoting fallacies out of nowhere, you should say exactly why it's fallacious rather than just quoting a fallacy out of nowhere.
Pogan, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I did actually explain to you why the case you were making was question begging, which is the fallacy I accused you of. The reason you were question begging is because you said something wasn't coercive, presupposing that coercion was a purely legal understanding when talking about a system, right? So if you say something isn't coercive and you presuppose, like, you're smuggling in the conclusion as a premise, right? You're saying, coercion only exists when something is a purely legal understanding, right? And then smuggling in that definition without expanding upon it or establishing why it is preferable over competing understandings, you then make the claim that capitalism is not coercive. When asked for an argument to substantiate that capitalism is not coercive, you merely repeat the definition, which is a form of circular reasoning.
Well, no, I asked you why your definition is better, and you can answer.
The questions that you asked me are irrelevant to me showing you.
Oh, so it's just irrelevant me asking why your definition is better, but it's relevant for you to ask me why my definition is better.
I know you're,
but not the other way
dodging,
around.
But I actually did explain to you why it was a form of question begging. You can pretend like I didn't all you like. You can do these weird crowd appeals. I did provide an explanation as to
crowd
why
appeals.
It was a form
Interesting.
of reasoning.
It's crowd appeals coming from the guy who's like, well, I think the audience would agree with this, blah, 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 like 12 times in the debate.
Yeah, I mean,
and you're worried about crowd appeals.
To the usage of a term in common parlance.
Yeah, that's not a crowd appeal, apparently.
Well, if you want to call crowd appeal appealing to common parlance and common understandings of terms, then you're free to do that. But when I accused you of using a proprietary understanding of coercion, I was correct in doing that. You can complain about it all you like.
It's not proprietary, though, as we've gone over, I suppose.
Yeah, your attempt to show that it wasn't proprietary was appealing to the Stanford Encyclopedia, which refutes your exclusivity, right?
It doesn't, though.
Yes, it does. It refutes the idea that it's a strictly legal sense. And you were appealing to
that.
No,
it does. It is strictly legal.
Do you want to go over it again?
Yeah.
Do you want me to read it
again? So they were saying that
it's
removing people's freedoms, which is a violation of rights, and therefore, under natural law, it has to be illegal.
No, except you weren't talking about natural law until the very end. You were talking about social...
Bro, have you not watched any of my debates in prep?
I try to avoid content from ANCAPs as much as possible.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question.
Makes sense.
I'm absolutely...
I can see that you haven't watched any of my debates.
I will absolutely encourage people to go back through this recording and note that the definition halfway through the debate is very distinct from this natural law.
I encourage everybody watching this to watch all of my videos through, so then I get more watch time.
All right, this is from the Optimistic Pessimist for $2. Thank you very much. Neither definition of coercion is paradigm neutral. Pogan, would you like to comment on that first? And then Liquid, you can comment as well if you like.
Paradigm neutral implying that it's not free from bias. Is that the idea? I guess I don't get what the guy means. But
I assume by paradigm neutral he means that you're assuming some kind of conceptual ambience that hasn't been justified.
I mean, I guess if there's any assumption that goes into my usage of the term, the assumption is that when people are presented with dilemmas, they, at least conceptually in a vacuum, could make a choice in that dilemma that is free, aka not influenced by extenuating circumstances that they don't have control over. Coercion being a situation in which, similarly, you're presented with a choice, but one option in that dichotomy, for instance, is affected by extenuating circumstances. If that's what the guy means, then so be it. Otherwise, I don't really understand the question.
All right, Zulu, would you like to comment?
I mean, I agree. It's neither are neutral towards what exactly our paradigm of thought is, we could say. Both of us are assuming some sort of theory about what coercion means. I completely agree.
Thank you very much. It's from August Leo for $5. Thank you very much. This is directed at Pogan. Pogan, if not all coercion is bad, then you must justify it. This being the case, it must be a legal term, yes or no?
What the fuck does that even mean? What? If not all coercion is bad, then you must justify it. This being the case, it must be a legal term. No, there is justification that exists outside of a legal context. There are plenty of instances where something can be ethically justified, and yet in spite of that be illegal in a given society. Presumably this guy doesn't even believe that it has to be a purely legal thing, right? There is the idea that, what, if I violate the law to fucking save somebody's life from an imminent, like, death, that it's nonetheless still unjustified purely because it was in violation of some law? That's ridiculous.
Well, again,
Zulu, would you like to comment?
You know, if well, he's going into if not all coercion is bad, then you need to justify what coercion isn't bad, right? You know, what coercion is bad. You have to justify why this is the case. So therefore, you know, you have this legal concept attached to it.
Okay. This is from Max the Confessor for $10 at Zulu. Zulu, if this debate went beyond definitions, would you have gone into feasibility of alternatives, or at least the possibility of non-capitalism, I'm assuming, with less instances of coercion? What would your arguments be?
Well, if they'd gone beyond definitions into, you know, well, what is our actual dispute here? It's going to be over, well, should this capitalist mode of production be prohibited? I would go into argumentation ethics, as I'm sure people who have watched mine and Sunday's debates will be imminently aware of, right?
Okay. Pogan, would you like to comment?
Sorry, I couldn't find the button. I mean, the question is directed at Zulu, but I'll just reiterate. The reason it didn't go beyond definitions is because Zulu made a very calculated move, which is to when presented with a definition of coercion, rely on a series of red herrings and questions not pertinent to the proposition, while also using a proprietary understanding of coercion that not even the source he linked agrees with.
No, the source I linked does agree with it, though.
I didn't realize I was done talking, man. The point is, I think that was a very measured. I think that was a very measured decision on his part, because if the definition of coercion that, again, is most commonly utilized in philosophy and ethical discourse is established, the case for capitalism, at least baseline, not being coercive becomes a nigh impossible task to meet. So I think that's kind of like the source of the behavior here.
I mean, do you want to go for that definition then?
I mean, we could do it for the ninth time.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be any useful on you.
I have the set page up here. Coercion is typically thought to carry with it several important implications, including that it diminishes the targeted agent's freedom and responsibility, and that it is a pro tanto wrong and or violation of right, i.e. it is violation of rights. It is doing something which is illegal. That's what it means to be a violation of rights. It is illegal.
Yeah, so rights are only provided by law?
Yes.
You mean social law? Or are you now talking about
rights are a law concept. They're a concept in law. It is saying that this thing should be prohibited.
Social law or natural law?
Well, law in general, I suppose, but natural law is the only correct law.
Wait, but if it's social law, then again, I was correct in insinuating
violation of rights. I'm a natural law theorist. Again, watch any of my debates.
Pogan, make your reply, and then Zulu.
Yeah, see, the problem which is being raised again here is that you cannot even stick to your own proprietary definition because you're completely waffling. When somebody pushes you on a conception that deals with social law, you then defer to natural law. But then when I ask you, okay, so does the definition deal with natural law? You say, well, not necessarily. It can also deal with social law. By the way, just because a definition talks about the idea of freedom being constrained or something being a pro tanto wrong, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be violating natural law in the sense that you or any other anarcho-capitalist or minarchist is talking about. It's very calculated to be using it in that way, though, because it allows you the freedom to completely dodge the proposition as you've been doing.
Well, it has to do with law, right? So coercion has to be an illegal thing. It has to violate rights.
That's the claim.
No
Hang
matter.
on, Pogan.
Whoa,
He's
whoa,
replying. Hang
No
on,
ma-
Pogan.
No,
Zulu,
no matter what conception of law you're dealing with, it has to be an illegal thing. So then we can go into, well, which conceptions of law are correct and which are incorrect. Well, natural law is correct and positive law is incorrect. You're ascribing to positive law, I'm ascribing to natural law. So, it has to be a violation of rights, which has to be illegal, because that's what a right is. A right is something that is illegal to take away from you. So no matter which conception of law you're dealing with, it has to be an illegal thing.
Do you think if a kid is prevented from crossing the street by their parent, that their rights are being violated?
Nope.
Okay, but is it coercive?
Nope.
Right? Really? So if I say you can't cross the street where there's like this constant influx of traffic, and if you do cross the street without my permission, I'm going to take your Xbox away. That's not coercion?
Not coercion.
Yeah, see, this definition that you're using in no way comports with any philosophical or ethical discourse. Your misconstrual of the Stanford Encyclopedia does not substantiate.
Where's my misconstrual? Where does it lie?
The misconstrual, again, is insinuating that when it talks about diminishment of the targeted agent's freedom and responsibility, that it's necessarily invoking this nebulous concept of natural law that you keep referencing.
No.
There are plenty of instances. Did you want an answer to your question or not?
I'm not saying that.
Did you want an answer to your question?
I'm not saying.
Hang on. Pogan, finish your sentence, then Liquid, you can reply.
There are plenty of instances where somebody is given a dilemma that is weighted in virtue of one reason or the other, and yet you're going to have to say that if their natural law rights are not violated, it is not coercive, even though their otherwise free choice is still being influenced. Their freedom, is being affected.
Now let him reply.
Why are you so insistent on ignoring the "and" part of this definition on the SEP? I've got it up right now. And that it is a pro tanto wrong and or violation of rights. Violation of rights. This is not inherently natural law. This applies to all law systems. It's a violation of rights that you hold, which is a legal concept. So it applies to all law systems. So there are coercion in any given law system. Now we can then go on to, well, which law systems are correct and which are incorrect, which is what I wanted to go into. Well, natural law is correct and positive law is incorrect. Your positive law is incorrect.
Okay, now Pogan, you can reply.
Yeah, because there's no argument provided for the case that a violation of right necessarily invokes an understanding of natural law.
Did you not listen to anything I said there?
No, I'm directly responding to what you said. Even in the case that it's a social law as opposed to a natural law, the idea that a law has to be violated in order for it to be a violation of rights or an imposition of freedom is what you failed to substantiate throughout the debate.
What do you think rights are?
That's not a question I need to answer, considering I'm not making the claim that coercion is a violation of rights necessarily. You're making that claim.
Okay, so look, I'm going to allow you to the final comment, and then we're going to wrap it up because we're on the half hour, and we'll have an open panel in 30 minutes after that. Your final comment, please.
It is just insane to me to say something like, well, a violation of rights is not an illegal thing. Rights are an entirely legal concept. You're saying
that's not what I said.
You're saying that anybody, when they are saying that you should, that this thing is a right, you are saying that this should not be violated, that this is something which should be held as something which should not be taken away from people, that it would be a violation. A prohibition should be implemented in front of this violation of these rights. It is insane to me to say that this has nothing to do with the law.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, gentlemen, that's the debate. I'm going to let you shout out your channels, and then we will close off. Pogan, please.
Yeah, I'm at youtube.com/PoganVids. I make a lot of leftist content talking about both.
Pogan, we can't hear you. You're mute.
Hello? Test, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, wait, maybe you're not mute.
I could hear him. I can hear him.
Hello?
I can hear you, Pogan.
Sunday, no. No, not the audio failure. Sunday?
Okay. I cannot hear anything. What just...
Sunday's dead.
It's okay. It's alright.
Let's get back to present ceiling.
What's that line from Rise of Skywalker? I've died many times before, or whatever he says. That's.
It's been so long since I fucking watched that.
There you go.
Do we just continue?
There we go. Sorry, I don't know what on earth just happened.
There we go.
My mic just disconnected. Sorry, Pogan, did you manage to shout at your channel, or were you muted? I couldn't tell.
No,
He was not muted. He was not muted.
I was having a mild panic attack because I thought you had, like, vanished for a second. It's
Yeah,
okay,
me too.
though.
Liquid, please.
I didn't finish the show. No,
Oh, did you? Okay.
It's okay.
Did you not? No. Go for it, please.
It's youtube.com/PoganVids. Same shit everywhere. You'll find me. Who cares? Go ahead, Liquid, please.
Yeah, Liquid Zulu. I do videos on YouTube, anarcho-capitalist videos. I know Present Sunday's audience will be very interested in all that stuff. They're very anarcho-capitalist over there. youtube.com/Liquid Zulu.
All right. We will have an open panel in about half an hour. Everyone is welcome to come. There will be a link in the description. There's a maximum of 6 people, so queue up. Take care, everyone. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good night.
Ya.
Yep.
And thank you for the debate, guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's very enjoyable.
No worries. That was interesting. Yeah, so the open panel will be up if either of you want to be in. I imagine there will be people present for that. Just a warning: when there are controversial debates like this, sometimes there are trolls in the thing. So I have had a number of people showing the wrong end of themselves on camera first. So just be advised that's a possibility. Just how that goes. All right, I'll see you in a bit.
All right, see ya. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this stream, take a piss, and then get into that Present Sunday I'll put on this until we're done, though. You know, just to finish off the stream with something, with the Pogan Lost highlight. I'll, take a piss, and then go into that Present Sunday panel. Maybe at some point, me and Idol will do a review of this, hopefully. Yeah, see you guys later. Oop. Boop.